When Dragon's Dogma 2 first released, it got a ton of backlash and a lot of misinformation was being spread about it. I've put in around 10ish hours into the game so far and wanted to share my first impressions with the game. Dragon's Dogma 2 is an open world action RPG with a medieval fantasy setting. As the name suggests, it's the sequel to the original released back in 2012. However, you do not have to know anything from the first game before playing the sequel. Honestly, calling it a sequel almost feels wrong. It feels more like a remake than it does a sequel. I did play the original when I was a kid, however I never finished it and don't really remember much from it, so my impressions will fall more along the lines of someone who is new to the franchise, even though I'm not really all that new to it. I'll be doing my best to avoid any spoilers in this video since this is more so just my thoughts on the game so far. For starters, let me address the elephant in the room that everyone has been talking about recently, and that's the microtransactions that are available for the game. Right now, there's quite a few different microtransactions for various in-game items such as consumables for reviving characters, changing character appearances, fast travel, and even in-game currencies. While I do think that having microtransactions for a single player game is pretty ridiculous, I do want to say that these items aren't locked behind these microtransactions. All of the microtransaction items can be obtained in the game fairly easily. If you can't find them in game, you can also buy them from vendors with the in-game currency that you'll accumulate honestly really quickly. Obtaining these items also isn't some grind fest to encourage players to buy the microtransactions either. Honestly, in game, you wouldn't even really notice that there was microtransactions unless you really went looking for it. Again, I still think that microtransactions in a single player game is a bad idea. However, I'd much rather they be done in the way that they currently are, where they're not even being encouraged to be purchased, rather than always having some kind of store pop up every time I launch the game trying to get me to buy something. And all of the items are obtainable in game with nothing being locked behind a paywall. Moving past that, let's talk about the actual game itself. From what I've experienced so far, Dragon's Dogma 2 is one of the best open world action RPGs I've played in recent years. Kicking things off with the character creation, since that's where you start in the game, the character creation is extremely good. You can get very detailed and specific with what you want to do for your character and for your main pawn. Character creation isn't all about cosmetics either. Depending on how you make your character will influence their strength, speed, stamina, carrying capacity, etc. So not only is there a ton of customization, that customization also has pros and cons to what you choose to do. Once you're thrown into the world, the story begins to introduce itself to you. However, I won't be touching on the details of the story in this video. I will say that what I have experienced from the story so far, it's really good. Every choice you make and even how long it takes you to do it impacts the world and story around you. Your choices actually have consequences and can change how certain quests go or even how certain characters act towards you. Speaking of the world around you, the world in Dragon's Dogma 2 feels so packed with content and is all open to be explored whenever you want to explore it. Remember how back when we all played Skyrim for the first time and wandering off in a random direction led you to some cool structure, and at that structure was some sort of story attached to it? Dragon's Dogma 2 absolutely nails this over and over again. Exploring in Dragon's Dogma 2 is so incredibly well done that you won't even want to fast travel because there is absolutely no telling what you will encounter on your trip to your next destination. There is fast travel, but it's pretty limited. However, in my 10ish hours of playtime, I've only fast traveled 3 times and it was all by choice. Every other time I actually wanted to walk the path back to town because I was very likely to stumble into something new that I hadn't seen yet, and this happens very often. Combat so far feels pretty good. Fighting giant monsters like Cyclops and Griffins doesn't just feel like mindless shooting or hacking and slashing. You can target individual spots on these monsters to weaken them in certain aspects. Attacking a Cyclops' legs will result in it stumbling more, where attacking its eye will do more damage. Latching onto these massive mythical beasts in the middle of combat is also a possibility. Personally, I don't really get up close and personal with enemies since I'm currently playing as a mage. However, the option is there if that's more of your playstyle. Earlier, I mentioned being able to create your main pawn without really going into detail as to what pawns are. Pawns are companions that you can hire to assist you on your journey. You can have a max of 3 pawns at one time, including your main pawn. You cannot get rid of your main pawn, so they are with you forever. If they happen to die, I'm not entirely sure what happens yet because my pawn hasn't actually died yet. You and your main pawn level up as you progress throughout the game, giving you more health, stamina, etc. However, the other 2 pawns you can hire do not level with you, so you'll constantly be switching out 2 members of your party as you get stronger. You can recruit other players' pawns and have them fight alongside you, so if you want to recruit your friend's main pawn, you can. I thought this was something you had to opt into because I hadn't really done much of anything with this system. However, I had gotten a message saying that another player had used my pawn and returned them. If someone is using your main pawn, they aren't removed from your party, but instead the other player gets your pawn at their current version or level. When you or another player is done with a pawn, you can choose choose to dismiss them and are prompted to give a rating of the pawn and even send them away with a gift to the player who owns them. Player created pawns are both just naturally around the world as well as inside the rift, where you can even search for specific pawns. For example, if you wanted to use the pawn I created, you'd follow the steps I'm currently showing on screen and enter the code for it. Feel free to use GigaChat if you'd like. If you'd like to share your pawn codes down in the comment, feel free to do so as well. I'd love to see all of the characters you all have created. I'm not sure if the pawns can be shared cross-platform or not, so for just in case purposes, include the console you play on if you do decide to share your codes. Performance is by far the weakest aspect of Dragon's Dogma 2. So far I've had 3 crashes and several FPS drops that were really noticeable, especially when going into large towns. NPCs fade into and out of existence really close to you, which kind of takes away from the immersion of the game. Hopefully the performance improves over time through updates and patches, because as it currently stands, the performance is just nowhere near where it should be for a AAA release. I've also seen a lot of people upset at the fact that there's only one save slot, and that issue has actually been addressed recently. The dev stated on Twitter that they're working on adding the option to start a new game save when a game save already exists. From what this sounds like, I'm assuming it's going to be more along the lines of allowing players to have multiple different playthroughs going on at the same time. From my understanding, the reason they're being so strict with the save slots is because they wanted to try to prevent save scumming, which is understandable. However, at the same time, I spent $70 in a single player game. If I want to save scum, I should be allowed to. Currently, I believe that Dragon's Dogma 2 is a Game of the Year contender with its sheer amount of content packed within it. As time goes on, my thoughts and opinions on the game may change, and I plan to make several videos on this game. Have you played Dragon's Dogma 2 yet? And if so, how are you feeling about it? Are you absolutely loving it, or are you still not fully sold on it? I'm interested to know your thoughts down in the comments. If you're new here and like anything and everything about gaming, I recommend subscribing so that way you never miss a video.